I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Andre Stackhouse. You've probably seen Andre on here before, one of the biggest healthcare advocates that I know. But Andre actually is a part of a new project called Medicare for All Everywhere. Andre, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me again, Sabrina. Good to be here.
All right, Andre, really quick, before we get started, can you explain to everyone a little bit about your healthcare activism and some of the projects you've been a part of?
Yeah, for sure. It all takes off really quickly because I think like a lot of people really got into this, with the original Bernie Sanders campaign. So I was kind of like an internet activist before that, where I was tweeting and getting into arguments on Facebook. But Bernie was really where I was like, I should step in and actually work on this stuff for real. And, since then, I was a Bernie delegate at the state and national convention in 2020. We voted no on the platform as a block because of its lack of Medicare for all. And it really, became my issue over the course of those two campaigns. And so, I started working on it back at home, and found Whole Washington. And at this time, I'm the campaign director of Whole Washington, where we're trying to get single payer on the ballot. But I think it's been just a little bit over a year that that we founded Medicare for All Everywhere. And I suppose the other thing in there is led a couple of the healthcare justice marches in the last 2 years. So all about healthcare, really any way I can show up for it.
Awesome. Well said. So Andre is working on this project called Medicare for All Everywhere. And Andre, let me know when you're ready to share your screen. But to start with, can you explain to everyone, what is this about? What is the strategy for Medicare for All Everywhere?
Yeah, I'll just I think I'll start sharing my screen, but the basic idea of this is that in my time working a bunch of different organizations, different levels of this fight, whether it's like more policy level or advocacy level, I noticed that there was so many different groups doing fantastic work, and yet they seem to be completely siloed, right? And so that kind of laid down the foundation for why I wanted to start Medicare for All Everywhere, was to create some connective tissue between all of these different parts of the movement. So this is just a little bit about me. I already mostly introduced myself, but from Bernie to campaign director of Whole Washington and co-founder of a national organization. I don't really know how it happened. Before all of this, I was a software engineer at Microsoft. But I've found a greater calling, I'd say. And I think you've had Terrence on your show before. He's in Massachusetts. He ran for office as an independent, had a really great campaign, but he's one of the co-founders of Medicare for All Everywhere, kind of just connected on Twitter. And he was asking about a sort of regional Northeast healthcare coalition. I said, well, let me do you one better. What about the entire country? And so we started to have these Medicare for All Everywhere meetings. Betty is somebody who I'd worked with in the past and has been all up and down the single payer movement in California. And so just, from day one, we had representation coast to coast, big states and smaller states. And so, we kind of just wanted to take a big picture look at the Medicare for All movement, right? And do some power mapping of where it is. And so, at the executive level, we had a president saying that he was ready to veto it. So many issues in the Senate, right? Even Bernie Sanders, right, kind of dragging his feet on introducing it, eventually did it on May 12th last year. So we've been happy about that. But, Manchin and Sinema showing how capable they are of killing incredibly popular legislation. And, Sinema's news today switching to an independent. So we don't even have technically necessarily that vote as part of the party block anymore. Then the parliamentarian, the filibuster. So incredible obstacles in the Senate. And then even in the House, right? We have a Congressional Progressive Caucus and a lot of people who support it, supposedly, right? But are waiting for permission from Nancy Pelosi. And now we see a new Speaker of the House who, if anything, at least in line, who could be even more conservative on this issue, right? And so we wanted to think, how are we going to break through these incredible barriers? And Democratic Socialists of America actually had a really good Medicare for All organizing guide. And I think kind of articulates the idea better than anywhere else that I'd seen. So they said the realization of Medicare for All will not happen in a vacuum or handed down from the top, but one through a bottom-up mass movement. And in order for that to happen, the grassroots efforts at local, state, and regional level need to be built and interwoven. And so
Can I just interject really quick here?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
This piece is so important because I'm so glad that you mentioned Joe Biden saying that he would veto it, because we always come back to that point, right? Like, even if this were to pass, like in the House and then the Senate, we have a president that doesn't want it to happen. Ro Khanna mentioned this when he was on my show. He said, I'm sorry, but as long as you have a president that doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. And this is the reality, right? Like, so the fact that they have this, and this is this Democratic Socialists, that they do have this piece here, I think it's important for people to understand. Even with DSA, they were telling you from the very get-go that it is going to be a bottom-up mass movement. And sometimes I sit back and I think about it and I'm like, well, maybe we were going about this the wrong way. I don't know. Like, maybe we were going about this the wrong way, but they actually had this strategy laid out from, you know, the get-go. So they're trying to explain to people, sometimes we might have to make some changes, and they're telling you you're going to need the grassroots effort on the local and the state level. And I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we talk about that federal fight, right, I think that when you have a president, for instance, who's a Republican or who says they're going to veto it, what that signals to a lot of people is, well, it's hopeless. So because they're entirely focused on two bills, right? One bill in the House, one bill in the Senate, and the president. But when you think bigger, right, and you realize that the movement is a lot bigger than Congress, it's a lot bigger than the president, it's a lot bigger than two bills. It's actually a movement that has been going on since like the 40s, right? It's all across the country, even in states that you would never imagine, right? And so there's always these seeds, and the question is, can we cultivate them until they grow into a strong enough movement that is able to win this federally, once and for all? But you can't just look at the destination, right? You have to look at the entire picture.
Right. That's right.
So, and that, I think when we think about the context of this, right? So on the left, I've got Canada, and the province there is Saskatchewan, because that was the first province to pass Medicare in Canada, and really was the start of their healthcare revolution. And the point I always make about this is that Saskatchewan is not it's not an urban province. It is not a liberal province. It's like a rural conservative province. And yet, a socialist movement took control of that province, gave those people healthcare, and it was so popular that eventually it covered the entire country. And then in the United States, we have a kind of similar story, but like with a more mixed legacy, which is the state there is Massachusetts, because the last federal reform was Obamacare, or as it was previously known, Romney Care, but it came from Massachusetts. And the point is that, right, the states have incredible influence over federal policy, right? And so we just observe that, and we start to think, okay, so if we're looking at the power that we have at the within the states, what could we do, right? And so, just as a sort of case study example, um, the national popular vote, right? The idea that we might want one. So this isn't about whether or not that's a good idea, but I was always told growing up that the electoral college was in the Constitution, and therefore it was the law of the land. And if you ever wanted to change it, you'd have to change the Constitution. But the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact was some very smart people who said, well, maybe I'll read the Constitution, see what it says. And what they found was that it actually says that the states can allocate their electors however they like. And so they had the idea, well, if enough of us agree that it ought to go to the winner of the popular vote, we could just choose to give our electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote. And so they created this compact where they say, join the compact, and if enough of us join it, we'll give our electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote. So you can see that little chart. It has the green for all the states that have joined the compact, and you see Massachusetts and Washington in there. But if you look at the yellow states with pending legislation, we actually almost have enough for 270 votes, which is to say that this is by far the most serious challenge to one of the deepest, most powerful institutions in US politics. And yet we could see this challenged in our lifetime, right? So it's not that California can eliminate the Electoral College, right? It's not that any state can eliminate the Electoral College, but the states together have incredible power to do things that might otherwise be insurmountably challenging.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out too with your map here, this is something that CJ has touched on multiple times about sometimes, a lot of times in the United States, these progressive policies per se, it starts on the coast first. It'll start on the West Coast. You guys are usually ahead of us, like over there in Seattle. Like it'll start on the West Coast, then it'll start like on the East Coast, more so the Northeast, and then it makes its way towards Middle America. So that's how a lot of these things started, whether it was with maybe marijuana legalization. CJ points out the no smoking law where you can't smoke in restaurants. That started on the coast first. So a lot of times this is how these things start.
hmm Yeah, women's right to vote is a good one, passed in just a couple of states first. And so that's kind of what we saw, right? It's like we actually have this movement, right? And there's all of these different groups running these campaigns in different states, and a lot of them have single payer policies. A lot of them, are working on legislation or an initiative, right? And so you see this spread across all of these different states. And so that's where that idea of, well, what if we join them into an actual coalition, right? And coalitions are very difficult to build. They, the details matter incredibly. So to kind of create the big picture vision, because right now this is more of an idea, right? The coalition doesn't exist yet, but the idea is more or less that you can imagine a partner for each state, right? Or a chapter for each state. And the point is that every partner in this supports both state and federal Medicare for all. And that is to help us create that bottom up, top down mass movement that doesn't factionalize, right? And instead remains a unified movement that moves forward together and then makes its decisions democratically. Um, and so, that gives us all sorts of possibilities, right? So, this one I call modular Medicare for all, right? And so, what's the idea? Well, the first state might be really difficult to pass single payer in, right? We're trying to be the first one in Washington. Actually, Oregon just passed Measure 111 on the ballot, which
Yep.
we'll see if that makes it all the way through to a single payer implementation, right? But once that first state passes it, what about the states next to it, right? Can they
Mhm.
link those plans together to create an interstate regional healthcare plan? And you can imagine, say, Washington, Oregon, California, like you say, being the first three states or being three states that pass it, join those states together into a really big healthcare plan. Now you're starting to achieve the kind of like economy of scale that really could be expanded to cover the whole country, right? So it might be difficult when you're starting small, but the bigger we can sort of make this, the more close we'll get to having it federally. Um, other ideas, right? So like cross-state fundraising, right? So some states are rich, some states are poor, some states have a ton of people, some states are spread out and low population, right? And most importantly, some states have really well developed single payer movements, and other states are maybe just getting started, maybe don't have a single payer movement at all. So what if we raise money together, right? Imagine Washington, Maine, and Arkansas doing a cross-state fundraiser together, right? They raise those funds together, and then at the end of the day, they split them 3 ways between those 3 groups, right? Well, the state that's richer, that has more Medicare for all donors, right? They can help then by having those funds split, develop a state where $1,000 might go way farther, right? Because you're earlier in your campaign. So it might be what seems like a small amount of money to CalCare could be a huge amount of money to a state that's just getting started. And then cross-state infrastructure, and that could be anything from like phone banking, social media, digital tools like text banking, email lists, right? Because legislative sessions, they come and go, campaigns end, right? But the movement needs to never stop. And when, for instance, CalCare didn't make it over the finish line last year, right? Instead of all of those people who are working so hard on CalCare suddenly feeling like, well, what do I do now, right? I guess I'll go find some other thing to work on. Instead, we'd rather immediately plug them into, well, CalCare maybe is going to enter a little bit of a slow period, but whole Washington needs you now, right? And even though you're in California, that doesn't mean you can't pick up a phone. It doesn't mean you can't boost a message. It doesn't mean you can't even fly to a state and gather signatures. And in fact, that's one thing that we've done. So we organized trips in the last year, both to Maine and Washington, and had people from a couple of different states come and gather signatures for campaigns that were for healthcare plans that wouldn't even necessarily cover them when they went back home, but because they believe in this idea and want to help develop it further. And then getting into the ways that the states are special and why it actually makes us stronger to focus on all of the different states, right? So really common thing that people say, well, the states can't deficit spend, right?
Right.
But again, if you look into these things that are often presented as just hard truths, simple truths, often are a little bit more complicated. So the reason states can't deficit spend is because most of them have passed what's called a balanced budget requirement. It's just a rule, right? There's not like a law of physics. If they got rid of it, then it wouldn't be a rule. And it turns out that some states have very weak balanced budget requirements. And in fact, 2 states, Wyoming and North Dakota, have none, right? So you might not think of North Dakota as like a strong contender for a single payer healthcare state or like the first single payer healthcare state, but it might be that the fact that they don't have a balanced budget requirement actually makes it easier to finance, right? So we need to observe what we have in terms of our own power in each states and say, how can we
Right.
capitalize on that? So
Right.
same thing with ballot initiatives. Oh, go
I
ahead.
want to add something really quick about North Dakota that some people may not be aware of. North Dakota also has public banks.
Hmm.
And some of you may wonder, well, why is that important? When people say, where are you guys going to get the money from? Where's the state going to get the money from? You get around that by having a public bank. So if North Dakota already has public banks, they should already be trying to do. I don't know anybody that lives in North Dakota, but if you guys know people that live there, they should already try to get some initiative going to get something like this done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll come back to some of that in a minute. But yeah, ballot initiatives are similar, where some states have them, some states don't. Some states have very strong ballot initiatives, some have kind of weaker ones, right? But in some states, this is an incredibly powerful path to pursue, and you know that I'm all about it here in Washington. And others, it might not be possible. And in fact, again, when we talk about that idea of like unified movement, fighting on all fronts. Right? You don't even have to choose. So here in Washington, we are trying to get this on the ballot, but we're also preparing to introduce this into the legislature, right? Into the House and the Senate, so that we can let our legislators hear from us and let them, know that they're going to keep hearing from us until they co-sponsor our legislation, right? So that builds unified across legislative and initiative paths. And then a little extra note about initiatives, right? So These 7 states now are all states that have done Medicaid expansion, but there's 7 states that did it on the ballot. And the latest one is actually South Dakota, who just passed it in November on the ballot. And I think what is so remarkable about these states, right, is that their legislature didn't want to expand Medicaid. Their governor didn't want to expand Medicaid, but their people still needed health care. And their people organized themselves to put it on the ballot and then voted it into law. And, there's a lot of different actions that people can take to expand single payer, right? Like we just passed a resolution at the Seattle City Council last week. But Medicaid expansion is, I think, one of the best ways because, it's not just building support, it's getting people actual health care, right? So like, for instance, Patty Murray doesn't support Medicare for all, and it would be a great victory to get her to co-sponsor it, right? If we could like convince her, flip her vote on that. But at the end of the day, that'd be one more vote in the Senate and 0 more people with health care. But 45,000 people in South Dakota are now eligible because of this Medicaid expansion, right? So it gets us closer to national single payer, but it also gets people health care in the process. And I just like to add that, I myself am on Medicaid, and I'm in Washington, which is a Medicaid expansion state. But it's only because I'm on Medicaid that I'm able to be a full-time healthcare activist, right? So when you think about these small expansions make us freer and more powerful as like a people's movement because we have healthcare, and that helps us expand it further. And then to just sort of bring it all together, the 2 big questions are always, how's it going to pass and how are you going to pay for it, right? And so I try to think of this into a bigger theory of change that kind of I find myself at the intersection of, right? So progressive taxation, is an answer to how are you going to pay for it. It's one of the challenges that we work with in Washington with a very regressive tax code. I think y'all do a lot better with that. But then we can go even beyond that with public banking, like you mentioned, right? Because then you can raise money through loans and through investment. And instead of paying interest off to some New York bank, you keep it in the state so that it can further fund infrastructure. And then last, small d democracy. And we talked about ballot initiatives, but there are so many different ways that we can expand small d democracy, whether it's automatic voter registration or vote by mail. And then that picture on the left, the unicameral, that's the legislature of Nebraska, because in Nebraska, and they did this through a ballot initiative, they actually don't have a separate House and Senate. They just have one legislature. And what that means is it's one fewer veto point, and the representation is more proportional, because in almost all cases, the Senate is a disproportional representation of the population, but in a unicameral legislature, they've done it in a proportional way, right? So if we have more political power as grassroots people and grassroots organizers, and if we have more economic power in our own homes, in our own states, then we can pass Medicare for all everywhere. So that's the big idea. We're on Slack. We got a website, medicareforalleverywhere.org. And it is early days, it's an exciting project to be a part of, but we're just trying our best to get in touch with all of these different groups, ask them if there are things we can collaborate on, and then over time, build that into a real formal coalition that eventually will include all 50 states and DC and the territories. That's what we're going for. And we think that if we can build that coalition, then we can 100% win national improved Medicare for all.
Well said, Andre. And I think it's really, I'm glad you brought up the point about public banks as well, because one of the issues that does come up is, or one of the cons that comes up where people say about state to state single payer is that the federal government could come in and could deny it because the state still needs the funding. But one of the ways that you get around that is by having a public bank. And that's why I say North Dakota should definitely be jumping on this, because they can avoid that. They can avoid that. And that's one of the things too that I really want to like push. Shout out to Roger Meadows for the super chat. He mentioned this as well. Andre, let's find someone in North Dakota to push Medicare for all as a ballot initiative. I would really like to get public banking on the ballot for Massachusetts. It would be really great if we had a public bank here in the state. That would help us with a lot of these things, some of these other policies that we are trying to get passed. But I think I just want to point out, like, to people, totally we realize like this is should be for everybody. Medicare for all should be for everybody. Single payer should be for everybody. We totally get that. I think what Andre is trying to point out to you, though, is that while we're sitting here waiting and hoping that one day we'll get a president who will let this go through. And right now, that's not happening anytime soon. And if Republicans take over the White House in 2024, it's definitely not going to happen. So, what could you be doing in the meantime? And I think that's the point that Andre is trying to drive home to you guys. I want to show you their website here as well. Medicare for All everywhere. And Eric, could you put the link to the website in the chat as well? They also give information here, how you can volunteer. For those of you who do want to help, this is something that you can join, that you can be a part of. Again, like I said, like, we can sit around and we can be angry and we can be frustrated. And there's been a lot of frustration going around like the past couple of months. Oh dear. Or you can do something. You can try to do something. And I think that's the point. Like Andre's driving home here. Now, I see there's an option here for a march. Is there a march planned at some point, or is this something you're trying to do?
We did it on July 30th last year, which is the anniversary of Medicare. So it was 57 years. And, we haven't like officially announced it, but what I can say is I personally have led 2 marches in the last 2 years in Seattle and would be very surprised if we didn't do one this year. And, for us, it's like the way that we try to organize is we try to step forward and say, we're doing this. Who wants to join us? Right. So we're marching in Seattle. Who out there wants to march on the same day, right? And then, a lot of what we're doing, again, is sort of like, we're not trying to invent the wheel or reinvent the wheel or like duplicate work that other people are doing. So we really like being sort of that clearinghouse where we have formed all the relationships. We know what, the different movements in all the different states are. So you come to us and then we help you get plugged in because you're maybe brand new to the movement. You've never heard of all of the orgs and stuff. It's difficult to navigate. So yeah, just get in touch with us. You can DM us on Twitter or you can email us massmovement at gmail. It's massmovement.healthcare@gmail.com. And yeah, we'll get you into our meetings. We'll get you plugged in with people, hopefully in your area. Obviously, some states we've got a lot more people, and others we might be starting from scratch. So I do have a colleague who just recently moved to Seattle from North Dakota and did introduce me to some folks. So we even have a little tiny start in North Dakota. But yeah, absolutely. Anyone out there who's hearing this and thinks it's exciting, get in touch and we'll build this together.
Awesome. And Roger Meadows, thank you for the super chat. Medicare for All and public banks as an amendment ballot initiative, not law in cheap states. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Arizona, Nebraska, Missouri, Montana, Colorado, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So the government can't repeal, weaken, or alter without asking voters first. Thank you so much for that, Roger. Yeah, I love the fact that you included the territories as well, because that's another thing that comes up sometimes is like, what about DC? People forget about DC a lot in reference to like passing policy. But I love the fact that you also included Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, America, Samoa, and Guam. Again, U.S. territories, they should also have the same benefit as well. But yeah, this is awesome, Andre. Like, I know you've been in this fight for a couple of years, at least as long as I have known. And what I want to remind people is Andre is in Seattle. So he's in Shama Sawant territory. And he's in a city where, look, organizing on the ground that's just how it is. Like, you have a lot of people there this is what they do. Like, it's just a part of life for them. And we can have this in a lot of these other major cities as well. It's just about starting something and having people that want to be committed and people that actually want change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you would be like, yes, it is a part of sort of our culture, I would say, out here in Seattle, but it's also not a coincidence. I think it's something that's built over time, and uh, that's why I encourage people to think about that Venn diagram of their taxation, public banking, and small d democracy, because it is sort of like, you know, when you start to believe that you should be included in the process, then immediately you start to say, well, why shouldn't I be able to put something on the ballot, right? Are you saying that we as citizens, uh, you know, aren't as smart as our legislators, even though our legislators are supposed to be citizens representing us, right? So those contradictions start to be more obvious when you actually get involved. And so you start to say, well, I think I should get my ballot in the mail. I think I should be able to, you know, uh, whatever it is, right? So I think that just starting, and then it starts with just your sphere, right? Who can you get to go with you? But it gets bigger from there. And um, I think the number one thing actually that creates a sense of like civic culture is winning, right? So when you can get some wins, and then those wins make your life better and your community's life better, they go, wow, that was worth it. Maybe we'll do that again and win something else.
That's right. That's right. And I want to remind you guys, even this is not just something that is happening in blue states. Like even red states are passing some of these progressive policies. Nebraska just passed $15 minimum wage. South Dakota is also a red state. They expanded Medicaid. Like what I found anyway is that when you just give people the question and it's not attached to a political party or a candidate, that's what throws some people off once it's attached to a candidate. And like, I like what they're saying, but I don't like that person. So
Hmm.
then they're not voted for at all, right? So I think that this is giving people direct democracy, and that's the big difference than when we put forth politicians who most of the time they are lawyers, and we're trusting them to handle this type of situation. They're just one person. It's not just them in Congress. And even though they may vote one way, if you don't have the majority on board, these things are not getting through, or these bills aren't even brought to the floor, depending on who the speaker is, like you mentioned with Nancy Pelosi.
Right. Yeah. No. And, I think that, when I worked on the first Bernie campaign, and it really showed me the sort of media landscape that we live in, the way that, our partisan politics works and stuff. And it was like very eye opening and in some ways shocking to me. And I remember after that campaign saying to myself that I was going to keep organizing, but I was going to work locally instead of federally, and that I was going to work on an issue instead of a candidate. And the reality is, of course, I still work on all of these things. Um, but I think that you're totally right in that it might be something about human psychology, or, the way that we've been sort of culturally brought up to handle these things. But I think candidates and political parties become this shortcut, or like an excuse to turn your brain off, right? So the moment I heard that Bernie was a Democrat, I knew I would never vote for him, or whatever it is, right? But when you really make it issue, right, an issue and an issue only, right, it is both an invitation, but also kind of requires people to open their brain up and think about it, because they can't just say, I remember thinking that Bernie was right on basically every issue, and if it had just been about the issues, we would have all just been able to go home. But the problem was that the entire conversation became about whether or not he was like a good guy, which frankly I like him, right? But I don't care if he's a good guy. I care about who does he represent, what policies is he bringing to the table, right? And I just was so frustrated with the way that was pushed out of the conversation, that I try to organize in a way that would force the conversation to be about the issue and the issue only, because that's where we're on completely firm territory. And that's why
Mhm.
the way that they resist this is by trying to silence it and kill it quietly, right? We just passed this at Seattle City Council, right? It was a non-binding hybrid state federal resolution. Um, and it passed 4-2, but the two were abstentions, right? They don't want to vote it down because that would make them look really bad. They don't want for the rest of their lives to be hounded about that one time they voted no on giving everyone health care. So they
Yep.
abstain, right? So try to not give them the out. Take the no, but take it with the camera on, and then immediately say, okay, we hear your no. Do you mind explaining why?
Yep. That's right. I want to address this from Betsy. Right, Sabby, but didn't Florida overturn the will of the people who passed a BI to give felons the right to vote? Yeah, that's true. I did talk about that, but that is a situation where the Democratic Party in Florida actually could have intervened there, and they did not. They had plenty of time to jump in and try to fix that, and they decided not to. We actually talked about this on Call In a couple weeks ago, how they decided to be reactive instead of proactive. That could have been prevented as well. But yeah, that is one of the cons sometimes, depending on which state you live in with ballot initiatives, is that the governor can come in and overturn it. But again, that's why there are certain provisions that you can put in to prevent that from happening as well. And they slept on that. Like, I'm sorry, but they did. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Arizona for Medicare for All Coalition agreed to run Medicare for All ballot initiative amendment. That's awesome. I didn't know that, Roger. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, and we could definitely be in closer touch with the Arizona people. I think they're really small, and we haven't necessarily met them yet, but we'd love to hear about what they're doing and see how we can help.
Awesome. Well, Andre, thank you so much for coming on. Let me know if there's any updates, and you want to come back on to talk more about that as well. But thank you so much. And like I said, kudos to you for sticking in there, and hanging in there and still fighting for healthcare for people.
Thank you so much, Sabby. And yeah, it's better to have hope and keep working than it is to just pack it all in. That can be the easy way, but it's not better.
That's right. That's right. Thanks
All
so
right.
much, Andre.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sabby.
Bye. All right, guys. Welcome. Welcome. Okay. Hope you learned something there. I love to have like organizers come on. So if you guys know people that are organizing as well, even if it's if they're doing local organizing, let me know. Let me know so I can bring them on. I like to shout those things out as well. All right, guys, let me go ahead and give a quick shout out to Sabby patrons. Then we'll get into our discussions for tonight. All right. Shout out to all of you who are Sabby patrons. Thank you so much for your support. If you are interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. They're also scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker as well. And if any of you know a better way for me to display this, please let me know, because I feel like the names are kind of tiny on here. I know they scroll across the bottom of the ticker, but I feel like there's a better way I could do this to make this look more presentable. And I believe I shouted out newbies last night. Yes, I did. So thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, tonight, I do want to give you a heads up. Tonight's stories actually have a theme. Let's see if you can figure out what that theme is. Now, I didn't plan it to be this way, but it did end up happening this way. But I love it when we have themes. All right, so tonight we are discussing Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss Twitter Files Part 2. Now, we talked about Part 1 on Sunday, and now we are going to discuss Part 2. Yes, that information has been released. We are also going to discuss Professor Richard Wolff alert. Professor Richard Wolff also has something to say about Twitter and Elon Musk and censorship. And I really want you to hear that discussion. And we're also going to discuss Garland Nixon is censored again. Now, I didn't get a chance to discuss on here fully about his Twitter suspension, but now something else has happened. So we're going to cover all that at once. And of course, Andre was just here to discuss Medicare for All update, Medicare for All everywhere. Definitely check out that site, you guys, and help if you can. Okay, I'll go ahead and take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. All right, Michael. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin. Michael. All right. Thank you for the super sticker, JM. Mastermind says North Dakota is the Cayman Islands, the Cayman Islands of the US. I could see that. I could see that. I had a friend from high school that moved to North Dakota. This was like random, like a couple years ago. And he was like, moving to North Dakota because they're going to pay me a lot of money. He moved to North Dakota. He lived there for 2 years. And he told me that North Dakota had more jobs than people. I kid you not. That's what he said. Anyway, he went to work for some company there. Didn't need to have the experience. Apparently, they'll just train you. He made a lot of money. He did that for 2 years, and then he moved back to North Carolina. So I don't know. North Carolina or North Dakota with the public banks and apparently these jobs that are paying a lot of money. Whoopity doo. Thank you for the super chat, Roger Meadows. Ohio, a cheap state, allowing ballot initiatives for amendments also. Thank you so much for that as well, Roger. And Kim, yes, thank you for reminding me to shout this out. International Human Rights Day, NYC vigil to free Julian Assange. That is happening tomorrow, Saturday, December 10th at 1 p.m. at the British Consulate. Thank you so much for the reminder, Kim. That'll be at 885 2nd Avenue, New York City, between 47th and 48th Street. I believe, I'll have to double check, but I believe Max Blumenthal is one of the speakers. And I think I saw that Roger Waters is going to be a speaker there as well. So if you can attend, check that out. I can attend. I actually have another protest to go to tomorrow. So there's a lot going on tomorrow in terms of direct action. But I have an anti-war protest to go to tomorrow, and I'm going to try my best to live stream that. So I'll be a part of that. Okay. North Dakota is a tax shelter state. Listen, I'm learning a lot about the ND. I am learning a lot about the ND. Oh, man. All right. Let's go ahead and get into this first story here about Garland Nixon. If you go onto Twitter and you search for Garland Nixon, you will see that there's this disclaimer that this account does not exist. For those of you who are not aware, Garland Nixon is probably one of the most, well, I consider to be one of the most prominent voices on the left. Garland Nixon was a former police officer. He's been on here before. We talked about defunding the police. That was an interesting discussion. But he also has a radio show in DC, which is pretty popular from what I understand. He has a YouTube show. He's done a lot. He's done a lot. He's also an activist as well. He was also at the Julian Assange rally in DC. So he was permanently suspended on Twitter. He went on to Jimmy Dore's show to talk about that. Garland Nixon can be sarcastic sometimes on Twitter. And it was one of his sarcasm tweets that got him into hot water, basically. Now, I told you guys this before, that there are these accounts on Twitter. There are these NAFO accounts, and they are mass reporting people, particularly those who tend to be anti-war or anti-imperialist, and those who have a different narrative about the war between Russia and Ukraine. They came after him. They came after Jackson Hinkle. Although Jackson Hinkle's account has been reinstated on Twitter, Garland Nixon's account has not. And I don't know what to say about that, except for the fact that all of us should be doing what we can. If that means tweeting at Elon Musk and saying, please reinstate Garland Nixon needs to be allowed back on Twitter, period. But then something else happened. And this was recent. And actually, it was one of you that sent me this because I didn't know. Because again, he's not on Twitter. So I had no way of knowing, But apparently, Garland Nixon has now also been apparently suspended from Facebook. This is why I tell you, all of these social media platforms, they all run together, you guys. They're all doing the same type of censorship. It just may be done in a different way. So Garland Nixon did have a chance to speak about this on his channel. So let's see what he said.
Let's take a peep and let's figure out why Garland is suspended from Facebook. Let's start. Why don't we do this? Why don't we start by taking a look at Garland's Facebook account, just for the fun of it, huh? Why don't we? Let's look at Garland's Facebook page, and we see all kinds of things. Oh, a funny little ghost. You know, you wouldn't be blind if you would poke holes in your sheet. Well, I thought that was funny. And every now and then on Facebook, you just put something up because you think it's funny. Well, let's go by there. And interestingly enough, The Guardian.com, angry winter, Germany's Monday night protests unite far right and far left. I thought that was interesting. The COVID, nobody said you wouldn't. I shared that from somebody else's. You wouldn't get COVID if you're vaccinated. I put, oh, really? And I mean, I just shared this meme, and you got a bunch of people. Historically, these are things that people said, and this is the date and time, right? Okay, let's go down. I did one of my breaking news announcements. Look at that. Breaking news. Now, why did I do that? So I'm in my office. I've got various TVs, and one of them says CNN. And I mean, it's CNN, it's MSNBC, it's Fox News, it's all of these, it's RT, it's all kinds of different stuff, right? And one of the screens was CNN, and they said Joe Biden is going to have some kind of a forum at the White House on anti-Semitism. And I thought, well, I see some irony there. Time for breaking news. So I put breaking news, President Biden to announce that, because they were like, President Biden to announce forum on anti-Semitism at the White House. So I put breaking news, President Biden to announce that members of the Nazi Azov Battalion to hold anti-Semitism forum at the White House. I felt
so he does a lot of humor. Like I told you guys, he does a lot of like sarcasm, and he used to do that on Twitter a lot too.
Like I needed to do something to show the contradiction. There's this morning I had Scott Ritter on. There we go. Black in the Empire. When America no longer has any use for Ukraine, we're going to have a bunch of angry Nazis armed with U.S. weapons looking for revenge, just like what happened when we did the same thing to the terrorists we used for other wars, you know, stuff like that. Ukrainian court rules, SS division symbols are not Nazi. See what I mean? So I got stuff. Sheldon Wolin, inverted totalitarianism, well worth the read. So you see the kind of stuff I got. There's Bernie, sheepdog getting an AOC, stuff like that, all kinds of fun stuff. In these difficult times, some kinds of, so you can see kind of the direction. There we go. I need help, please. Food, housing, student debt relief, protection from inflation, please. Sorry, Jack, got to help the Nazis in Ukraine. So you can see I like a lot of humor, stuff like that. Oh, this is a good one. Here's the one. People in the 60s. I better not say that or the government will wiretap my phone. People today. Hey, wiretap. Do you have a recipe for pancakes? So I got good stuff. Lots of support Democrats, support Nazis in Ukraine. Also Democrats. How did Germany go bad in the 1930s? So you can see the kind of stuff I got, right? Lots of stuff that you might not like. Okay. But none of that stuff do I get suspended for, but you can look at that and say, very interesting, right? Interesting stuff. Picture of me back when in my days when I was on Fox News, you know, stuff like that. So this is my Facebook, right? And you go here, let's look. My account is restricted. Look at the type of restrictions. You can't go live for 89 days, right? You can't join or start any calls for 89 days. Your account.
How did they come up with that number, by the way? You can't start or join any calls for 89 days. Who came up with the number 89? Why not 90? Why not 70? Why not 60? Who comes up with 89? I'm just curious. Where does that number come from? That is so random. It's like, it reminds me, you know, my former supervisor made fun of me one time because I was running late because the train, I was on the subway, and the subway was like stalled at Harvard, at the Harvard stop at Harvard University, which does happen often. And I was just doing the estimating, and my ETA was basically telling me I was going to be about 7 minutes late. So I messaged my boss and I said, train stuck at Harvard. Looks like I'm going to be 7 minutes late. I got to work. I walked into the office and my boss looked at me and she goes, Sabrina, I just want to say it's hilarious that you said you were going to be 7 minutes late. Not 5 minutes, not 10 minutes, but 7 minutes late. Then she went on and told me, by the way, we don't care. We don't care if you're running late as long as you get here.
Is restricted for 29 days. I can't post. But we need to figure out why. What is it that Garland Nixon did? What is the horrible thing that he did that stands out, right? Okay. And here we're going to run into our issues. Why is your account restricted? For 29 days, your previous post didn't follow our community standards. So you can't do things like post or comment. Now you notice they didn't say what the community standards were, but let's take a look. You're going to find that this is very interesting. When I get to where I'm going, you're going to go, ooh, this is.
Why is your account restricted? So this is another problem that a lot of people will run into. Like, you'll receive the message that says your account is restricted. This is not just a Facebook issue. This happens on Twitter for people as well. You'll receive that notification. They'll tell you that you violated the guidelines. But then they don't go into detail and tell you exactly what you did or what you said that was the problem so that you can prevent doing that in the future. This happens on YouTube as well, by the way. People who receive those same notifications. Community standards, LOL, Venti Cafe. So that's the other thing too, is like when they say community standards, it's just like, who's in the community? Did the community vote on those standards? No, they didn't. Some tech person in the company decided what was going to be acceptable and what was not going to be acceptable. The community didn't vote on those standards. So that's always interesting to me.
Is interesting. So you shared this on your profile, right? Okay. I shared something, an Amazon link that says Adolf Hitler, Time Person of the Year, 1938, singles classic, right? Let's click on it and it goes to Amazon.com, right? It is.
So here's the question that I have, and this was a similar issue with Kyrie about sharing a link, right? And I want to be careful what I say on here in reference to that as well. Obviously, this is on Amazon. So we have people like Kyrie, we have people like Garland Nixon being censored for sharing a leak. And Kyrie was even more extreme. He was shamed, but censored for like sharing a link, an Amazon link. But there's no criticism for Amazon for having it. It doesn't, it's like the people who share the information, they're the ones that are being censored, the ones that are being attacked. But nobody is saying anything to Amazon. Nobody's saying anything to the CEO of Amazon. No one's pointing any fingers at them. They're still allowed to sell the product. Does anybody find that to be a little bit strange?
You see the magazine, it's Time Magazine, singles classic, right? Okay. So that's something that is historically accurate. It's something that people might want to write an article about. Gee, what was up with Time? Why did they do it? And Time has discussed it. Oh, it wasn't that they thought he was great. It was that he was a very important figure in history, which of course he was doing very bad things. But for whatever reason, you can see I didn't link to the Daily Stormer, the Daily Azov Battalion, nothing like that. This is an Amazon link. It's what they call OSINT in the intelligence community, open source intelligence. It ain't even intelligence. It's stupidity. Anybody can click on that and they will go to Amazon and they will see Adolf Hitler, Time Person of the Year, right? Okay.
And I checked and it's still there. It's still there at Amazon. So just FYI.
But according to Facebook, I am suspended because about your comment, here's my comment, an Amazon link to that, right? So,
and it technically isn't a comment. Like, he didn't say anything. He shared that link, which is real. Like, this does exist, right? So you can't even share. Like, why wasn't he issued a warning and say, hey, just FYI, you can't share this here? You know what I'm saying? Really strange.
I'm done. So let's go back. I have my account is restricted, and this is why, right? 29 days, I can't, 89 days, I can't start any calls. 89 days, I can't go live. Why? Because I shared a link that said Time Person of the Year, 1938, Amazon. I guess Amazon, whatever. But you're going to love where I'm going with this.
So before he gets to the next part, there's something else that I want to point out. So Garland Nixon is one of the people that does live stream also on Facebook. I don't, because I I tried to do it one time and the thing never worked. I don't know what I did wrong, but I used to have Facebook as one of the definite destinations where I could live stream as well. I tried it one time. I don't know what happened. I thought I was live streaming on Facebook, and it turns out I wasn't live streaming the whole time. So anyway, that was like almost 2 years ago. But anyway, so I don't live stream on Facebook, but I have heard from other people that do that Facebook does tend to be a little bit more strict with the live streaming content over there than Twitter. Like I never get anything back from, like, Twitter never says anything to me in reference to like my live streaming destinations. I never hear anything from Twitter about my streams or anything like that. But some people, for them, Facebook is really good for them for live streams. It, they do have an audience over there. There are people that do that. I think David Pakman also live streams to Facebook. I think he still does. But yeah.
You're not going to believe it. All right, good enough. Garland is an evil guy. He might as well be a member of the Azov Battalion because he is sharing neo-Nazi stuff, unthinkable, a link to the Amazon. Let's go back and figure out how Garland, why would these evil men share such a terrible thing? So we go back to Ted Rawls' page. Ted Rawls, great guy, love him. He's a great, brilliant political analyst, a fantastic cartoonist, very talented man. Put up a post. And it's, look at this, Person of the Year, Vladimir Zelensky and the Spirit of Ukraine. And Ted Rawls says, where's the Azov Battalion and their Nazi insignia? How come the monuments to Nazi collaborator Stefan Bandera, it's Bandera, not the Bandera, something, I think, are missing? That's a fair question, isn't it? That's reasonable. Yeah, you got all these nice little people in the back, but they don't bring up the ugly side.
Mm-hmm.
So Garland Nixon sees this. And Garland Nixon says, let me look through the various posts. I'm sure people apply. All right, so there's the post. I go down. What will I see? Possibly somebody's put something there. Somebody's look at that. Oh, look at this. Mindy Siderud McCluskey puts 1938, Man of the Year, Hitler. I click on that. Person of the Year, Time, Adolf Hitler, 1938. I read it. Oh, Time explained that was perhaps the most controversial of its choices. Thus, Hitler became blah, blah, blah. Hitler's right, blah, 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 blah. This has all happened. Hitler lived his final months in a Berlin bunker, committing suicide. Oh, historical facts. There's nothing wrong with putting up a historical fact.
Do you guys see the problem? This is the problem that I've noticed with the censorship. These platforms are not consistent. They're not consistent with it. Why is it okay for that individual to share that same information that Garland Nixon shared, but it wasn't okay for Garland Nixon to share it? So this is something that it's a problem all across these platforms. Someone else can share the same thing that you were suspended for or you were censored for, and they won't get suspended or censored. I don't know how they go about picking who is going to be in trouble for certain content or not. I really don't know. I know there's a lot of, I can't even say that word on here, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of BOTS moving around on these sites. And it's not always fair. So if these are community guidelines, then why aren't the community guidelines applied to everyone? Why is it only just applied to certain individuals? That's that's one of the problems that a lot of people have. A lot of content creators have. It's not just those of us who do independent media. Even people who do vlogs, and I've done vlogs before as well. Even some people who do vlogs as well, they're like, wait a minute now. I did a vlog about the exact same content that another streamer did. Mine was removed and theirs is still up. What gives?
But let me ask you something. Let me see what I got suspended for again. You can't go live for 89 days.
That
Your
89
account is
still cracks
restricted
me
for
up.
29 days. Let's see why. Wait. Because I shared an Amazon link that said Time Person of the Year 1938 Adolf Hitler. And I violated their community standards. I'm restricted. I violated their community standards. Once again, Adolf Hitler, Time Person of the Year. That's my comment, right? Very easy. Time Person of the Year, 1938. Amazon, Adolf Hitler. Your account is restricted for 29 days. Why is your account restricted? Your previous post didn't follow community standards, so you can't do things. My previous post, what about this post? So I did that, and I'm suspended. But if we go back to Ted Rawls, the one that I saw before mine, and the reason I did it is still there. And they didn't restrict this person. Isn't it?
So I think you guys get the point there, but you can see the full video because that's not the full video. You can see that on Garland Nixon's. Why is it showing me that? I don't know. That's just really weird. Oh, there it is. On Garland Nixon's channel. It's called Garland Nixon Suspended from Facebook. So you can check that out there to see the full stream there. But I think you guys can see what's happening. Again, it's not consistent. They go after some and they don't go after others. He could have been mass reported. I don't know. But it's not consistent and it's not fair. So yeah, you don't have to agree with what Garland Nixon has to say, but honestly, I don't like the censorship. I've told you guys before, like it's a problem. Sumitra, Sabby, ask Misha/Steph at JD Show how they do their list. Oh, I could ask that. Yeah, because it just, I don't know. I feel like I should make it prettier or something. Leroy, LOL, I'm specific with my ETA too. Yeah, I know. I'm like, well, it says 7 minutes. Eric, there's an actual logical reason for odd numbers, given that they aren't as easy to remember. Keep track of for most people. That's a good point, Eric. Bill says Taibbi dropped Twitter files part 3 tonight. Oh my God. I can't keep up. Slow down. Slow down. I'm doing part 2 tonight. I can't keep up with all the links. It was the longest thread yet, something like 67 tweets. Oh my God. I would have to condense that one. Leroy, they could have also did it to him since he has a wider reach, which is a larger concern. That's a good point as well, Leroy. I'll go ahead and take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. All right. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Dave. Sabs, where is the anti-war protest tomorrow you're talking about? I will share that at the end. I have all that. I have that geared up to share with you guys. Thank you for this. The tip, Roger. LOL, Sabby. I told you on call in last night that Arizona for Medicare for All Coalition told me they were going to run it as a BI amendment come January. That was a really long call in, Roger. I'll be honest with you. I don't remember all, but thank you for the reminder. Also, DeSantis didn't overturn the amendment ratified regarding reinstating voting rights for the former incarcerated. What he did was find a loophole that said, sure, you can have your voter rights back, but you have to pay these fines first. This was partisan. Time for ballot initiatives to abolish parties. Thank you so much for that. Okay. We are moving on to our second story here. And this is Richard Wolff's economic update. I don't think I've done one of these in a while. I used to do it like once a week. But I told you tonight's stories have a theme. Now, in this piece from Economic Update, Richard Wolff is talking about Twitter Elon Musk's control of Twitter, but he makes the comparison about Twitter actually being a social. Hold on. Yes. He makes the comparison about Twitter actually being a social institution and the danger about having someone, just one sole person, making all the calls and the shots about what happens at that social institution. And I never thought about it that way. Now, Elon Musk isn't the first. I mean, there was another owner of Twitter before Elon Musk. That was Jack. But regardless if it's Elon or if it's Jack, I want you to hear what Richard Wolff has to say about this. Why is it that one person is allowed to make all the decisions here about what is best for the people on this social platform? Let's get into it.
Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. Today's show is going to be talking about many topics. We're going to have to get right to it. But the topics include Twitter, the claim that profits are justified by the risks investors take, the wave of strikes across Europe against inflation, the poor countries that are now in deepening economic trouble, the embargo against Cuba, and the collapse of the cryptocurrency economy. So let's get right to it since we have a lot to do. The scandal around Twitter and its purchase by Elon Musk raises a number of important questions that are not getting the attention in the media, and that's why we're going to talk about it now. The first and the biggest problem is this. Twitter is a social institution. It's the way millions of people communicate with one another, all kinds of important information. As a social institution upon which our society relies, it is a very serious challenge to democracy if one individual is controlling it, deciding what we can and cannot communicate, how, when, where, and at what expense.
Let's talk about that part just for a second. Does he have a point? I know some people were excited when Elon Musk took over Twitter because they said, yay, he's going to be pro free speech. But we've seen that's not necessarily the case. People are still being banned or being suspended, these temporary suspensions as well, under his leadership. But I've been thinking about this, and I have noticed some things. To me, I'm wondering why we did not question this before. Why is it okay for one person to decide what we can and cannot say on a platform and who should stay and who should go? Why is that okay? You know, people started to get, I guess I would say a little bit frustrated when he started to say that from now on, blue checks are going to have to pay $8 a month. Blue check people were like, wait a minute. People were like, how are you going to charge me for something that I earned? And I get that. Although many of them with the blue checks can afford $8 a month, but I get that. But what was interesting to me is that it took Elon Musk doing something like that for people to start to push back and say, wait a minute, you don't get to come over here and tell us what to do. Who are you to tell us we need to pay you for something that we've earned? And then people started criticizing, like, this is not good for him to own this. But the bigger narrative should have been, especially after listening to what Richard Wolff said, the bigger narrative should have been, it really wasn't okay for one person to have that much control over a social institution to begin with. We should have some say. Think about it. It's our text, it's our data that they're using. There's nothing in it for us. Twitter is not a public utility. Do we get any dividends from this? Same thing for all these other platforms. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, same thing. We should have been questioning this from the very get-go. And Professor Wolff is going to bring it home.
And when you realize that Mr. Musk has absolutely no particular qualifications to do any of that, having made money developing an electric automobile, you realize what a strange society we live in. But in case you haven't thought about it, let me remind you.
So I do just want to interject here and say that on that Twitter space call that I was on, that Elon Musk was like the guest speaker. I told you guys about this when I talked about Twitter Files Part 1. He did say that he had a coding background. So I guess in his mind, he thought that because he had a coding background and he knows how to code, that he should take over Twitter. Just because you know how to code doesn't necessarily mean that you should just take over this platform. I'm sorry, there's so much more to it than that. It's not just about coding. There's a lot of other things that you're going to have to deal with as well, right? Like you still have to make decisions about whether or not you're going to keep certain advertisers, whether or not you're going to start charging people $8 for a blue check. So that was something that I did notice when I listened to Elon Musk on that Twitter space. It was like in his world, he was just telling everybody like, well, I had some coding experience. And so I said, hey, how about I just go ahead and buy Twitter? And then I realized something like, this is really how he thinks. This is really how he thinks. He just comes up with these ideas that may or may not work, that may cost a lot of money and just bomb in the end. But it seems like he doesn't go through the logistics and the steps and the planning. I have friends like that. You guys ever have a friend? They always come up with great ideas. Great ideas. Let's do this, and that. But then when you ask them, okay, cool. What's the plan? How are we going to do it? They don't know. They just want it done. Some people are really good at coming up with ideas. And then there are people that are really good at executing those ideas. What I wonder with Elon Musk is the executing part. He comes up with a lot of ideas, but it seems like sometimes he doesn't think them completely through. Just my opinion.
Lots of inventions over time made by particular individuals came to be understood as social institutions and therefore taken over by society and run by governments or other kinds of social arrangements, but not left in the hands of private entrepreneurs. Schools. Here's one. Schools were started, if you go back far enough, by individual private institutions. But we now have a basically public, free education system, at least through high school. That's right. Hospitals were once private institutions driven by the profit of those who ran them, but many, many are now public. Roads, bridges, harbors, trains, soldiers, police, garbage collection, postal systems. You get the picture? Twitter is one of those, and it ought to be run by people collectively in communities and subject to governmental and community control. In other words, Twitter ought to be a publicly controlled utility, just like all those others are. And not.
I agree 100%. So we brought this up multiple times, right? We've talked about this: Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and of course, Twitter. I don't know about TikTok, but we've talked about this before. These should all be public utilities. Think about this, guys. Would these platforms exist without us? Would they? No. Listen, these platforms, they need us in order to exist. If all of us left Twitter tomorrow, would Twitter still exist? They would have to shut it down. Same thing with Facebook. Same thing with Instagram. If everybody just left, these platforms would have no use. So what does that tell you? We should actually be demanding something from these platforms. They're using our data. It's our words, our videos, our pictures that we put on Instagram and Facebook. Without us, none of these platforms exist. So why aren't we making some type of demand towards some of these platforms, these tech companies, for using our data? Where's our dividend? Where's our money? Why aren't we getting anything out of it? Because it's not a public utility. It is privatized. And while we continue to tweet on these platforms and we continue to post pictures of our dogs and our cats and our kids on Facebook, they own all of our data and they can take and do what they want with that data. This is something that we agree to when we choose to use the platform. They do give you the warning. They give you that disclaimer. But once they have our data, they can do what they want with it. But it's ours. And it may not seem like a big thing to some of you, but if you do any type of photography, especially those of you, I have a professional camera. Those cameras are expensive. You do any type of photography, you know how much money you put in to keep those cameras up and to keep things going. You went out and did the labor and took those pictures. Is Facebook giving you any type of profit from that? No. This should have been pushed a long time ago. Meanwhile, the people who own these platforms, they're billionaires. Mark Zuckerberg became a billionaire because of our data. Jack Dorsey, the original owner of Twitter, became a billionaire because of our data. And now Elon Musk is still maintaining his billionaireship along with his other businesses that he has. But Elon Musk is in that same position now too. He's still making a lot of money off of our data. I would like to see some type of push in Congress about that. Because meanwhile, we're giving them all this free data while they continue to get rich and they censor us. We give them our data and in return, they censor us, they suspend us, they remove our videos, they remove our tweets, they remove our posts. Why? They control the narrative, even on these platforms. It's not just mainstream media. They're trying to tell us what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. We have to be careful about what we say, and they continue to get rich. I mean, I told you can learn a lot from Economic Update. But I'm honestly sitting here and I'm asking myself, why weren't we thinking about this 10 years ago? 10 years ago. Something to think about.
Not run as a private profit. When you add that Mr. Musk clearly did not understand what he was getting into, having fired thousands of people, having threatened that he may go into bankruptcy when he had a charge of this quite powerful and successful institution, only makes it all worse. There should be no allowance for this. Give the people who develop Twitter some money if that's a reward for coming up with something useful, and then run it for the public, by the public, of the public, which we're supposed to stand for, but which Twitter is a mockery of doing. Okay.
And now it's gotten to the point where some people, I guess not so much for Twitter, but for the other platforms where people are making a lot of money off of, like these Instagram influencers. Some of them make a lot of money on Instagram, right? Some people make a lot of money on TikTok. I'm on YouTube, but I ain't making that money. I'm not making what they're making. I'm seeing what some of these influencers are making on these platforms. And so as long as you do have those people, I don't think I don't think those platforms will ever see that they really need to give us anything for our data. And I wonder if somebody has brought this up in Congress. I wonder if somebody has pushed this forward. I mean, this is huge, you know? Like I said, they continue to censor us over and over again. You want to take our data, but then you want to tell us what we can and can't say. They're still rich. Something to think about. Something to think about. I think he was finishing up here. Or...
Number two, and it isn't all that different. On November 9th, the owner of Facebook, or in its new name, Meta, Mr. Zuckerberg, laid off 11,000 workers. First of all, let's get that clear. One person figuring out what's profitable for his company wrecks the lives of 11,000 people. And
this is another point I want to bring up as well. This is another reason why we need worker co-ops. This is the piece, this is the importance about owners also owning the means of the production. See how Mark Zuckerberg can just lay off all those people. Just one person can make that decision. Yeah, I'm just going to lay off 11,000 people. If Facebook or Meta, whatever the heck it is now, if this was a public utility, or if this was a worker co-op, I should say instead, if this were a worker co-op, those 11,000 employees would still, it's like, because they own a piece of it, how are you going to get rid of them? But because they don't own anything, he can just say, okay, bye. Yeah, I know. You wrote that code that did that awesome thing on the timeline. Great. Bye. But what about my code? Sorry, you don't own it. I own it. JB and I talked about this yesterday in reference to worker co-ops. What Ice Cube is going through right now with Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers telling him he has to buy the rights to his own movie in order for him to own it. Because at the end of the day, even though he wrote the script, even though he was in the movies, the Friday movies, he didn't own the production of it. Hopefully this can be a lesson to a lot of us. You know, you can create something while you're at a company. Put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. But at the end of the day, if you don't own a piece of the company, you don't own your work.
Not just the 11,000 who lose their jobs, but let's go through it. Their spouses, their children, the communities that depended upon them. What happens to all those people? What happens to their lives, to their kids in school, all the rest of it? Smash, chaos, no one cares, no one does anything. One man's decision. He's obviously made lots of mistakes in his life. Those are bad enough. This one costs 11,000 people their job, if it's a mistake, which it probably is. Wow. But I want to focus on a particular point. People like Mr. Zuckerberg are constantly telling us that the enormous wealth they accumulate based on the profits earned by their companies is somehow appropriately given to them. And why? Because they took a risk. Let's be very clear here. The capitalists tell us they take a risk, and the profit is the reward to risk. If our capitalist also works in the company he invests in, well, then he gets a salary for that. Work gets you a wage or salary. Risk gets you profit. That's what they want us to believe. But it is, if you allow me, BS. Why? Because the workers take risks too, and no one pays them anything for it. The worker who goes to work at Meta or Facebook may have traveled enormous distance to take that job, moved her family across the country, moved her kids in and out of school, disrupting their lives, made a decision to take out a mortgage to own a home. They took enormous risks to work at a place that just fired them.
And don't forget about the people who were considered essential workers that took those risks during the pandemic as well.
1,000 of them. They took a risk. And you know, there's a difference. The risk a worker takes is that the people who run the business will make a mess of it, like Zuckerberg, and that they'll get fired. Whereas Mr. Zuckerberg, who takes a risk, is in charge of the business he's risking his money in. He has some control. The worker has none. And you know, if the business goes bad, the employer, Zuckerberg, can ease the problem for himself by firing the worker. But the worker, for the risk he took, he can't fire the boss. That's what the word boss means. So here,
I've only seen that happen once in my lifetime, and that happened here in Massachusetts. There is a grocery store chain here called Market Basket. Probably one of my favorite places to go to. It's pretty cheap. It's cheaper there than some of the other grocery store chains that we have here. A couple of years ago, the Market Basket in, I believe it was the one in was it the one in Somerville? Oh, shoot, I forget. It might have been multiple ones. Anywho, a couple of years ago, the employees at Market Basket, they found out that the CEO, the owner of Market Basket, was being removed and they were going to bring in someone else. Well, they didn't like that. So the workers basically said, yeah, we're not coming back to work. This was huge, by the way, because Market Basket, like I said, is pretty much the cheaper grocery store option here in Massachusetts. So a lot of people like to go there because it is cheaper. And the workers made demands. Imagine that. The workers did not want their boss to be removed because apparently that boss was very generous towards the workers, used to give them bonuses for the holidays, apparently gave them gifts as well. So they were like, no, you are not going to remove our boss. Like, apparently he wanted them to be like a family. So it was that type of working relationship where the employees actually really did like their boss. So the employees got together and said, you remove him, we're done. So they were just like, yeah, we're not going on strike. We're not going to come to work. So some people will say, well, you don't get to pick who your boss is. Well, apparently, in some cases, you can. And Market Basket here was that example. They said no. And so you know what happened? Their boss was brought back in and they came back to work. But I've only seen that happen once in my lifetime.
here we have it. In capitalism, capitalists get rewarded with profits for taking a risk. Workers, they get paid for their labor, but what do they get for the risk they took? Nothing. That's not a system that's fair or just. It's the opposite.
That's right. All right. I think that's...
And now the last of the first half program's updates. In Greece and Belgium.
Yeah, we're rolling out, Rich. We're rolling out. Okay. So you guys see the point that Richard Wolff is making? You see the point? It is very dangerous for one person to make all the decisions. And this is another thing, like for people who like to demonize socialism. Okay, let's not call it socialism. Let's call it something that maybe they can understand and relate to. One person to rule them all. One person to tell everybody what to do. One person to decide who and how many people will be fired or laid off. One person to decide how much money you're going to make. One person to decide how many hours you're going to work throughout the day. One person to decide whether or not you can take time off from work. Maybe put it in those terms when you're talking to people who are against socialism, and then explain to them, what if I told you, I'm channeling my Morpheus here, but what if I told you that you could prevent that if you were a part of a worker co-op? Maybe that's the way we should explain it to people instead of coming out with the word socialism, because it turns, some people will run off as soon as they hear that word and they won't listen to what you have to say, even though they may end up agreeing with you if they heard you. Something to think about. go to some of the comments here. Rodrigo, what's up? Whoa, Sabby hit 26K. Did I? I have not seen that yet. But thank you. Thank you. And thank you guys. Holy smokes. What's going on, Marvin? Thank you for the super chat. Government selling off responsibilities because fascist state. Ace Matic? ACO Matic? I think that's how you say it. They've tried to get all these cable and phone companies to be public utilities for decades, but they can't get them. I've heard about that before too. I don't know how much it would be, the push would be now for, I don't know, people getting rid of cable. So I don't know about that one. Thank you for the super chat, Larez. One of the reasons for UBI is compensation, for our data. It's a good point. Israel, Sabby Sabs. So the theme is censorship. What do I win? I don't have any prizes to give out. I know. Thank you for the super chat, Roger Meadows. One person to decide your worth and what to pay you. And one ring to rule them all. That's a little bit of Lord of the Rings for you, if you haven't seen those movies. I'll go ahead and take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. One ring to rule them all. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Mastermind Hour, it is South Dakota. Oh, I think you responded to Mastermind. Specifically, Sioux City is the tax haven Cayman Island state, not North Dakota. South Dakota is just the newest state to join Delaware, Wyoming, Tennessee, Texas, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, Florida, and trust-friendly legislation or measures in place allowing trusts holding assets to often remain anonymous or confidential, allowing those trusts to exist in perpetuity or 100 years, meaning assets never have to be sold or taxed. Interesting. Roger Meadows, I hope you write a book one day. That's all I'm going to say. Arthur, Sauron was a crony capitalist. Yes. Sauron lost his mind. Don't say his name too loud. All righty. Let's go ahead and get to our final story of the night, which I think most of you may be waiting for. And that is, yes, there is a Twitter Files Part 2 that apparently dropped. Bill informed me there's now a Part 3 that dropped apparently while I was live. So I'll have to come back with that next week. Sorry. But this portion of Twitter Files has been released by Barry Weiss. Now, you know, the first installment in this series, that's what I'm going to start calling it, because I don't know how many of these they're going to do, was released by Matt Taibbi. We went over all that on Sunday, but Barry Weiss has now come forward with Part 2. I did explain to you guys on Sunday that Elon Musk had reached out to Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss so that both of them would be covering this. Now, just for a second, put your opinions about Barry Weiss aside. I have opinions about her as well. But let's just get through Twitter Files Part 2. Dun, dun, dun. So Barry Weiss, Thread, the Twitter Files Part 2, Twitter's secret blacklist. Here we go. A new Twitter Files investigation reveals that teams of Twitter employees build blacklists, preventing disfavored tweets from trending, and actively limit the visibility of entire accounts or even trending topics, all in secret without informing users. We had a feeling that this was happening, those of us at RBN. Brianna Joy Gray had pointed this out before too, that she noticed something with her followers, right? She noticed that she had reached a certain amount of followers and then just plateaued, was not getting any more new follows. We noticed this at RBN as well. We also noticed that there were certain tweets from people that we just would not see. There were certain people that every day, if I check my Twitter feed, I would see the same people, sometimes people that I wasn't even following. But I wouldn't see the people I was following sometimes. It was really weird. We noticed that certain topics that we talked about on Twitter did not receive much traction. And by the way, I'll show you how you can do that as well, how you can see whether it's getting traction or not. Certain topics, Julian Assange, policing or police brutality per se, defunding the police. A lot of the issues that we talk about on RBN, MLK, Malcolm X, those types of issues, for whatever reason, we noticed they weren't getting that traction. And we started to question last year if we were somewhat shadow banned or something, or a ghost ban or something on Twitter. Now, there was actually a site where you could check this. We checked that back then. And guess what? We definitely were suppressed. And it's not just us. The RBN Twitter account, the Revolutionary Blackout Twitter account, that was another one where we reached a certain number of followers and then we never got any more follows. We also noticed some other strange events, which is where like I would go to retweet a tweet and then I would say, oh, I meant to put a comment under. I'd go back to comment. The retweet was gone. Like I never retweeted the tweet. I didn't remove the retweet. Somebody else did. That was Twitter. Those kind of things would happen. People would message me and tell me when my DMs were still open and tell me that they were unfollowed from me. I didn't remove them. These were the things that were happening. So I'm going to get through this. There's some things she points out. There's some things I wanted to debunk as well. But let's go ahead and get into it. I just wanted to give you guys like our experience that we had a feeling this was happening. We just did not have any evidence or hardcore evidence at that time. Let's go on. Twitter once had a mission to give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers. Along the way, barriers, nevertheless, were erected. I think I would have used a different word. Let me move on. I just can't. I can't do it. All right. Take, for example, Stanford Dr. J, who argued that lockdowns would harm children. Twitter secretly placed him on a trends blacklist, which prevented his tweets from trending. You see this? See that symbol? Yep. That is a nope. Trends blacklist. Active account. Recent abuse. There was no strikes, but he was on the trends blacklist. These are the kind of things that we couldn't actually see, but it was there. Let's carry on. Or consider the popular right-wing talk show host Dan Bongino, who at one point was slapped with a search blacklist. I don't know who this guy is, but that's probably why I don't know who he is. But again, you see this sign here? There you go. That's another one. Active account, search, blacklist. Let's go on. She goes on to say, Twitter set the account of conservative activists, I don't know if I'll call Charlie Kirk an activist, of conservative activist Charlie Kirk to do not amplify. So you can see here again, there's that symbol going down, active account, do not amplify. But again, I mean, he already had a large following anyway, so I don't think Charlie was hurting there. I think Charlie's doing all right. But to prove her point, Twitter denied that it does such things. In 2018, Twitter's Vijaya God, the head of legal policy and trust, and Kayvon Bekpour, head of product, said, "We do not shadow ban." They added, "And we certainly don't shadow ban based on political views or ideology." Okay. People believe that one too. What many people call shadow banning, Twitter executives and employees call visibility filtering, or VF. Multiple high-level sources confirmed its meaning. See, they have little code words here. Think about visibility filtering as being a way for us to suppress what people see to different levels. It's a very powerful tool. Now, that's coming from a senior Twitter employee. VF refers to Twitter's control over user visibility. It used VF to block searches of individual users, to limit the scope of a particular tweet's discoverability, to block select users' posts from ever appearing on the trending page, and from inclusion in hashtag searches. This was another thing they're bringing up trending. You ever notice it's always the same people trending? This was something I was like, look, something is up here. This doesn't make sense that either Vosh or Hassan would be trending on Twitter like every other week. That's not normal. You see what I mean? They're not even celebrities. So that's not normal. But those are the things that I would see. I'm like, they're choosing to amplify tweets from certain accounts and suppress tweets from other accounts. That's why they were trending like that all the time. Moving along. All without users' knowledge. She goes on to say, we control visibility quite a bit, and we control the amplification of your content quite a bit. And normal people do not know how much we do. Now, that is a Twitter engineer that told them that information, and 2 Twitter employees confirmed. The group that decided whether to limit the reach of certain users was the Strategic Response Team Global Escalation Team, or SRT GET. It often handled up to 200 cases a day. They actually paid people to do this shit. Like, this is what drives me crazy. Like, they paid people to do this. But there existed a level beyond official ticketing, beyond the rank and file moderators following the company's policy on paper. That is the site integrity policy escalation support, known as SIPPES. I'm not going to say that out. Boy, some of these acronyms, I've got to tell you. The secret group included head of legal policy and trust, Vijaya and Yoel Roth, and subsequent CEOs Jack Dorsey and Parag Agrawal and others. Goes on to say this is where the biggest, most politically sensitive decisions get made. Think high follower account, controversial. Another Twitter employee told them that for these, there would be no ticket or anything. One of the accounts that rose to the level of scrutiny was Libs of TikTok. So you guys remember hearing about Libs of TikTok. An account that was on the Trends blacklist and was designated as do not take action on user without consulting the SIPPES. So there's Libs of TikTok, and you can see that there, do not take action on user. So that's there. She goes on to say the account, which Chaya Rachik began in November 2020 and now boasts over 1.4 million followers, was subjected to 6 suspensions in 2022 alone. Rachik says each time Rachik was blocked from posting for as long as a week. Twitter repeatedly informed Rachik that she had been suspended for violating Twitter's policy against hateful conduct. But in an internal SIPPES memo from October 2022, after her 7th suspension, the committee acknowledged that LTT has not directly engaged in behavior violative of the hateful conduct policy. And so she has that information here where it says site policy recommendation. Site policy recommends placing Libs of TikTok in a 7-day timeout at the account level. So that's there. And under assessment, it says since its most recent timeout, while LTT has not directly engaged in behavior violative of the hateful conduct policy, the user has continued targeting individuals, allies, and supporters of the LGBTQIA community. So she has that information there. The committee justified her suspensions internally by claiming her posts encourage online harassment of hospitals and medical providers, by insinuating that gender-affirming healthcare is equivalent to child abuse or grooming. Compare this to what happened to Rachik herself was doxxed on November 21st, 2022. A photo of her home with her address was posted in a tweet that was garnered more than 10,000 likes. What happened? I didn't think that was the last one. I think that might have been the last one. No, I thought it was longer than that. Sorry, guys. I got to go back to... Okay, there we go. That was 21. Yeah, that was 21. I thought there was another. Okay, there we go. 22. When Rychik told Twitter that her address had been disseminated, she says Twitter support responded with this message. We reviewed the reported content and didn't find it to be in violation of the Twitter rules. No action was taken. The doxing tweet is still up. So they're saying here, we reviewed the reported content and we did not find that the violation against Twitter rules. But Barry saying here that it was still up. In internal Slack messages, Twitter employees spoke of using technicalities to restrict the visibility of tweets and subject. Here's Yoel Roth, Twitter's then global head of trust and safety, in a direct message to a colleague in early 2021. Here's that DM. A lot of times, SI has used technicality spam enforcements as a way to solve a problem created by safety under enforcing their policies, which again isn't a problem per se, but it keeps us from addressing the root cause of this issue, which is that our safety policies need some attention. Let's go on. 6 days later, in a direct message with an employee on health, misinformation policy, and identity research team, Roth requested more research to support expanding non-removal policy interventions like disabling engagements and de-amplification/visibility filtering. And here's that DM here. One of the biggest areas I'd love to research support on is non-removal policy interventions like disabling engagements and de-amplification visibility filtering. So you guys see all this, right? You guys see this? This all happened. So let's go on. Roth wrote, the hypothesis underlying much of what we implemented is that if exposure, misinformation directly causes harm, we should use remediations that reduce exposure, and limiting the spread/virality of content is a good way to do that. He added, we got Jack on board implementing this for civic integrity in the near term, but we're going to need to make more of a robust case to get this into our repertoire of policy remediations, especially for other policy domains. You see how far this is going, you guys? That's right. What was that? Someone just said this. This is really funny. Yeah, Mastermind, aka shadow banning. Exactly. There is more to come on this story, which is reported by Abigail. Let me hope over to say her names. Abigail Schreier, Michael Schellenberger, Nellie Bowles, Isaac Grafstein, and the team of the Free Press. Keep up with this unfolding story here and at our brand new website, The Free Press. So she goes on to say the authors have broad and expanding access to Twitter files. The only condition we agreed to was that the material would first be published on Twitter. We're just getting started on our reporting. Documents cannot tell the whole story here. A big thank you to everyone who has spoken to us so far. If you are a current or former Twitter employee, we'd love to hear from you. Please write to tips@thefp.com. And she ends here with watch for Matt Taibbi's next installment, which apparently happened while I was live. So here's the thing. They say they have more information that is going to come out. I'm going to wait for that. I'm going to look over what Matt Taibbi dropped as well, because maybe it's in that. I don't know yet. But I will say this. The impression that I got from that was that Twitter was basically censoring conservative voices. Notice those are the ones that were mentioned mainly. I'm here to tell you that Twitter was also censoring left voices, socialists, communists, not just conservatives. And I really want to clear that up. We were censored too. We were censored too. I just told you what they did to Garland Nixon, right? So Elon Musk made the mistake here. So Elon Musk says here, as Barry Weiss clearly describes, the rules were enforced against the right, but not the left. There's a couple of things that's wrong with this statement here. Number one, the Democratic Party is not left. I see people, again, they use those terms interchangeably. So let's be clear here. This is why this can be confusing to people. He says it was used against the right, but not against the left. The Democratic Party is not left. For the most part, from what I've seen on Twitter, Democrats, their content is definitely getting through. Okay. K-Hive, the K-Hive trolls, their content is getting through. The mainstream media, Democrat commentators and journalists, their tweets are getting a lot of traction and a lot of energy. I don't even follow those people, and they're always on my Twitter feed. I don't follow Mehdi Hassan. I don't even follow Barry Weiss, to be honest with you. But I keep seeing them come up in my feed. They are getting pushed out. They're getting pushed in the algorithm. But if you try to see, like, I'm talking like the socialist voices, the anti-war voices, anti-imperialism, anyone talking about Julian Assange, which I was surprised that day at the DC rally, he was trending that day. That only happened, I think, because we did a tweet storm. This is why we'll do these sometimes. And also because there was 5,000 people outside the parliament in the UK for Julian Assange. But I'm telling you, a lot of the anti-war voices are also censored on Twitter. And that can be from anyone who's a libertarian, anyone who's a leftist, a socialist, etc. Like, anti-war doesn't necessarily mean you're on the right, you're a conservative, or you're a Democrat per se. But those voices are censored. Try talking about some of those issues and see how much traction it gets, right? The NAFO troll farms, these little doggies on Twitter with these little soldier suits, it's ridiculous. Their stuff is getting through. And they're like attacking people and mass reporting people. And I believe, like I told you, I believe that's why Garland Nixon was removed. But this is not, he needs to change his framing. This isn't right. You shouldn't be saying the rules were, he should have said it looked like the rules were enforced against conservatives or Republicans, but not against Democrats. But don't say the left, because we have been definitely suppressed on Twitter. And not even just, don't even mean like necessarily socialist, but other people too. Like, I'm talking leftist commentators, leftist journalists, like they are definitely suppressed, especially once you start talking about certain things. So I don't know why Elon Musk tweeted this out, but I will say, I don't buy this. I don't buy it. Now, this is not to say that Barry's reporting is incorrect. She has what she has based on the files that were given to her. But what I will say is this: I'm going to check out what Matt Taibbi tweeted out later, which is the third installment from what I understand. I understand that came out tonight. But there's something is missing here. Something is missing here. So I'm going to wait and see if it's going to be revealed as well that leftist voices were also silenced, especially anti-war. So I'm going to wait for that. It's tricky though, because we may not have necessarily been on a list. And that's the other thing. He was responding to David Sachs. I don't know if you guys saw. He was responding to David Sachs' new narrative. They weren't shadow banning political opponents. They were just enforcing the spam policy. So he was talking about that here in reference to Barry Weiss. And then Elon Musk came in for defense there. But like I said, we have to be careful with the terminology. Democrats are not left. And those of us who are on the left, yeah, we have been heavily suppressed on Twitter and other platforms as well. So that was the second installment there of the Twitter files. Guys, make sure you hit that like button if you haven't had a chance to do so. I don't think I've said that on stream. That helps me with the algorithm. But I do want to shout something out. I don't want to forget to shout this out. Tomorrow, there will be a protest in Boston at Boston Common. Again, I'm going to try to live stream this. I'm going to try. I got to see what's up with the peeps. See if I can I'll have support. But this Saturday, come out and stand against the raging anti-imperialist war in Ukraine and to stand in solidarity with the masses across the globe and at home that are striking against the war's economic ramifications and the political machinery upholding this sick system. And it says, down with war, down with economy, and war governments. So this is tomorrow, protest against the continued escalations of war in Ukraine and solidarity with striking workers in Italy. So that is happening tomorrow, 1 p.m., Park Street Station. Those of you who live here, you know where this is at. I don't have to tell you guys, but Park Street Station over there by Boston Common. And at 2 p.m., they're going to march to the Italian consulate. Now, I won't be able to march to the Italian consulate because I actually have a webinar that I have after this tomorrow that Jill Stein and the Community Church of Boston is hosting. So I'm also going to be a part of that. So I'll actually be there for the protest, probably about for like an hour and 15 minutes. And then I got to head back and get ready for that webinar. So if you can make it, definitely be there. Oh, who is hosting this? Sorry, forgot to mention. This is hosted by United Against War and Militarism. So if you can make it, I'd love to see your faces, but I will be there. I will be there. Let me get to some of these comments here, and then I'm going to be peacing out, guys. No call-in tonight because I've already done the 2 call-in episodes this week. We had a long call-in episode last night. If you guys, I don't know if you were on that call or not, but that was probably the longest call-in I've ever done. I think it was over 4 hours, but we had a lot to say. Thanks for the super chat, Marvin. Like 2C ADLs setting on Twitter amplify ? And thank you for this super chat as well. Think pro Assange freedom comments suppressed. Yep. Although it's probably not now because mainstream media has been advocating for him to be freed recently. Nicole, they always took down my BLM protest videos I posted from Louisville, Kentucky. That doesn't surprise me. Mike, hundreds of ex-CIA employees now work at Twitter, deeply embedded. Sable says, I follow Barry White. Eric, honestly, Sabby, I think that plenty of these high-profile people are lumping Democrats with the left on purpose in an effort to permanently destroy the actual left. That's a good point, Eric. And thank you for the super chat, Marvin. ADL also driving censorship on all platforms. Interesting. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Whee! Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Peter. I believe that I was shadow banned after I made a comment on a Obama tweet criticizing Bernie Sanders' campaign slogan. I went from several likes and views to basically 1 or 2 views. I stopped using Twitter because of it. That's another thing that people have been saying too, that they noticed that they had like likes removed, and I don't know, man. I don't know. It's just, I think again, it's something that all of us, we felt was happening. I just didn't have hardcore evidence at the time. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Dr. Richard Thunder. I don't know what kind of spider that is. Is that the spider that bit Spider-Man? All right, guys, I am going to head out. Happy Friday evening. Have a good weekend. If you can make it to the protest tomorrow, I'd love to see you there. But it is time for me to head out. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. All right, guys. I'm heading out of here. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.